So today, Trump has finally noticed that not all might be going well, and he has placed a 90-day pause on the worst of his tariffs, restricting increases to 10% for everyone, except of course for China. We'll come back to that in a moment, but this couldn't erase the ugly side of what he's been trying to do with all of this, not least because it was on parade recently. Yesterday at the NRCC dinner, President Trump boasted that his tariffs, announced just a few days ago, had all the leaders of other nations desperately pleading with him for some relief.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir.
Do people really watch that and think that this is a good thing? I mean, seriously, you have a man extorting the countries of the world, threatening them with measures that promise to damage them in fundamental ways, to egregiously damage the entire world economy, indeed. And he's celebrating the idea that this means he can exert the blackmailer's power over them. We're at that moment in the movie where the protagonist has just made some seriously bad choices, and he's feeling smug about it, and you, the viewer, know that this is all going to have some serious payback. Not least because the Trump team is complacent about the amount of power they really have over the world, and because they can't be trusted with power, they are looking to seriously overreach. So, for example, Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro said yesterday that the White House was not seeking simply to get countries to reduce their tariffs in the sort of zero for zero tariff bid put forward by the EU, for example. If that had been the point, then you wouldn't have needed to do much of this at all, as many would have agreed to that deal in advance if told what was at stake. No, rather the US is seeking to force the countries of the world to change themselves in fundamental ways to suit the Americans. That's not how Navarro put it, of course, but it's exactly the implication of what he said. So, writing in the Financial Times, he said, "To those world leaders who, after decades of cheating, are suddenly offering to lower tariffs, know this is just the beginning." He reeled off a list of grievances, including what he called currency manipulation, opaque licensing, discriminatory product standards, burdensome customs procedures, so-called lawfare of taxes and regulation hitting US tech firms. So, your country insists on product safety standards, or food safety standards, or animal welfare standards, or carbon intensity standards, anything like that, higher than the US is prepared to offer? Well, you're on the naughty step. You will import chlorinated chicken and be happy. So you want to regulate US tech firms on data security or user privacy or harmful content? How dare you? Mind you, Elon Musk did call Navarro, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks. So he might change his mind about the US tech firm's part after that exchange. But you get the general idea. This isn't about fair trade. It's about the United States viewing itself as the unipolar world dominant power and insisting that the rest of the world subjugate all its differences and cultural norms to suit it, or else pay the price. The countries setting off for Washington in the belief that they need to cut a tariff deal are finding this out the hard way. South Korea, for instance, looking to get out from under the 26% tariff Trump slapped on them. Their trade team went to Washington this week, promising a package of measures to try to cut the $55 billion trade deficit with the United States. Trump celebrated the arrival of the team from Seoul, but added, "We are bringing up other subjects that are not covered by trade and tariffs." He didn't say what they were, but the US has had long-standing grievances on Seoul's standards for auto emissions, which US-made cars struggle to meet. Korea's refusal as well to import some American beef because of age restrictions and network fees on US digital content companies such as Netflix. Eventually, you have to ask, how much can governments do? Should they be inclined to give in to blackmail before they get pushback from their own people on some of those? And that's even before you get to the principle that you should just stand up to the bully. Not least because Trump's actions are playing out exactly as they first appeared, an act of profound national self-harm. So you probably shouldn't negotiate too much away before you see how much of this actually sticks for the long term. As indeed the 90-day pause just announced would rather confirm. For the reasons I covered yesterday, China is not calling up Trump, begging him for a deal. Today, it matched Trump's additional 50% tariff with an additional 50% of their own. This has clearly enraged Trump, since at the same time as hitting the pause button for everyone else, he has now increased the China tariff to 120%. Almost as though he's daring them to find new ways to strike back. I mentioned yesterday the potential damage to the US if China were to start selling off its huge stock of US treasuries. We don't know if they're doing that, but some people certainly are. A reflection of the plummeting belief in the idea that US debt qualifies anymore as a safe haven for investors. As a result, the 10-year US Treasury yield has been on an upward trajectory, the exact opposite of what you would expect in a normal period where the stock market is having problems. What that means is that US debt will become more expensive. A country that is severely indebted, as the US is always going to be vulnerable to the cost of servicing that debt rising. The US has typically been less susceptible because of its position as the largest stable economy, the safe haven. Strip away that reputational asset and you are into a world of pain you didn't previously have. But that's okay, there's plenty of pain for everyone, so don't worry that the US will be hogging it all. The Bank of England warned today that according to its analysis, the tariff disruptions are likely to lead to a global financial crisis. The combination of low or negative growth prospects alongside the increasing cost of debt worldwide will put numerous countries into serious difficulties. Global debt jumped by $7 trillion last year, so high costs of borrowing are going to make all that come home to roost. And the UK is particularly exposed to such shocks because of its open economy and its large financial sector. Separately, the European Central Bank, the ECB, said that what's unfolding matched, quote, some of the worst case scenarios that we had identified. Jose Luis Escriva, governor of the Bank of Spain and an ECB board member, said that international investors might now reassess the role of the US dollar. He suggested the euro might emerge as a more attractive alternative, saying this: we can offer a very large economic area and a solid currency which benefit from the stability and predictability which result from sound economic policies and the rule of law. But as things stand today, we are a very long way from that, and a rapid change will only come about because the entire system gets pushed into crisis, where major rapid shifts may come to be seen as desirable. It's worth noting that in any other situation where a foreign power was inflicting this sort of harm on your national interests, you'd probably take that, as an act of war. But here we are. Part of the mess of all of this comes from the inconsistency of Trump's foreign policy, if you can dignify it with that label. Back just 3 months ago, we began to realise that he'd bought into Russia's view of a multipolar world, where the great powers are sovereign and they take whatever they can, and the smaller, weaker countries do whatever they must. And so Trump could meet with Vladimir Putin, the two could carve up the world based on their spheres of influence. This is why the US is not so gradually pulling from Europe, while turning its attention to Canada and to Panama and even to Greenland. In this world, you deal with the other major powers with wary respect because of the damage you can all inflict on each other, so this constrains your ability to expand wherever you might choose to. But here we are just a couple of months later, and now Trump's tariff policy and the bullying that's going with it seems more based on the idea that the United States is still the unipolar dominant world power, that it can slap charges on the whole of the rest of the world. It doesn't need to be able to give any sort of coherent rationale for doing it, because you just have to suck it up anyway and pay the demanded tribute. The US was briefly the unipolar power once the Soviet Union collapsed. It just wasn't such a stupid and arrogant bully about it. But that was then. That moment is long over. Since the US is not as overwhelmingly powerful as it thinks it is, since others have grown in stature and ambition, the strategy is likely to backfire badly, because other states can and will push back. Trump believes the US is so powerful it does not need allies. It can alienate them all, extract as much out of them as possible, and they will have no choice but to fall in line. It is delusional. Unfortunately, when you frame your policy based on a delusion, your chance of getting the policy right is vanishingly small. It's just that the lesson of Donald Trump learning that is going to be painful for all of the rest of us. Was it the awareness of all that that finally sank in and got Trump to press the pause button? Obviously, all of Trump's allies will now pretend that this was the plan all along. Of course it's not a policy reversal, just the next stage in the master plan. Well, whatever the short-term reasoning behind this, it doesn't seem likely that it represents any sort of glimmer of awareness to disrupt the administration's basic delusions. As it goes more and more wrong in the future, he will find more and more creative ways to believe that it's all someone else's fault. As his own party rebels against him, they will have revealed themselves to be traitors. Nothing to do with his actions, maybe leading them to the pit of despair. And as countries refuse to fall in line, they'll be cheaters and nasty and all the names we've heard already, rather than countries who simply think they have a right to exist without a superpower bully seeking to enrich himself at their expense. My prediction for today, he's going to be doing an awful lot of complaining about other people over the coming 6 months. But nevertheless, as with any good Shakespearean tragedy, all of it ultimately will be traceable to just one cause.